Hello everyone, welcome back to our ZeroSync series. Today we're going to be discussing the permissions for ZeroSync. And I want to clarify real quickly. The permissions in ZeroSync are for the local cache server. So if you remember from last video, the cache server is something interacting between our database and our client. And we're going to need to set certain permissions for this so that we can tell, hey, this is a user that's authenticated to see messages sent to him, but not other people's messages. Or we want to be able to see some things about other people, but not everything. We're going to need to tell our cache what can and can be done. And then this is separate from our database permissions. So in Postgres, you may have permissions saying, hey, nobody can touch this except for an administrative role. That is going to be separate from the ZeroSync permissions. Our ZeroSync permissions are for that local cache server. They're not meant to replace your Postgres or other database permissions, although they could. Without further ado, let's dive into where we left off. Last time having one return value from our database set up using that cache server. I've added just a few things, so if you had the code from last time, go ahead and do a git pull. It's added to the repository. And for those of you that don't have the code yet, go ahead and clone the repository that is down in the description. But without further ado, let's run the server, see what this looks like now. It's just user interface stuff. I've added a sign-in page using a couple shadcn components and some basic Tailwind CSS. We've got an authenticated indicator at the top. We're going to show how that's implemented. It's not implemented yet, so let's get to work using our authentication with ZeroSync. The first thing you're going to need to do is head over to your .env file. Here we had our database string and our file string. We're going to need to add one more string. This is going to be our zeroauth key. Basically, it's a custom key inside of our application telling ZeroSync, hey, we have the ability to do things in the database. And from here, we can log in users, create users, and set up different permissions for each of those individual users. This key is pretty important. In production, you would likely make it something like a randomly generated string, have a bit more of an official key. Here, we're just going to say secret key. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. This can be whatever you want for now, especially in development. We're going to go to our main file where we have our zero provider set up. Right now, our user ID is anonymous. We're going to change that. And right now, we don't have an authentication function. We're going to fix both of those right now. We're going to need to install two packages to do this, though. We're going to use cookies to set up a JWT token for authentication. What this is going to do is going to allow us to sign this token with certain permissions, certain expiration date, pass this through our provider, and then either log someone in or deny someone entry. Let's install this package, which is going to allow us to decode that token that we encode into our cookies, which is going to require JS cookie. From here, we're going to import that function, decode JWT from that package into our file, and we're also going to import cookie. Oh, I think it is without brackets from the JS cookie. This is going to want us to do the types as well, so we're going to have to install that. From here, we're going to get our encoded JWT token using the cookie. Let's call it JWT for now. We'll set that later. And then let's set up our authentication. So auth will be a function which calls this encoded token. So this is saying, hey, our authentication is found in this token. Then we're going to decode it using that package we installed. Let's make sure it exists though. It's always good to have some error handling. And then let's get our user ID. Our user ID will come from this decoded token. Of course, this could be undefined, but it's going to have a sub. So if it does, we're going to decode this and say .sub as string. It's going to come out as a string. And if not, it's anonymous. So that'll get us back to where we were. And then we can simply remove this line of code to use that user ID. Here we have our provider set up with the token we retrieved from cookie. We're decoding it if we can, and then we're getting our user ID out of that token. We're going to have to set up this token in our cookie, of course, and that's going to come just a few minutes later. For now, though, let's head over to header to really set up this authentication logic. I think we're going to use state rather than a hard code. Excellent. We'll get a function to set that. This will, of course, be a Boolean. We'll use effect for setting this variable. And we'll say if our user ID is not set to anonymous, let them know we're logged in. And from here, let's add our user ID. And add it down here as well. So here we have a simple setup that's going to call our zero provider, ask, hey, where's our user ID? If it's not there, we're going to say, hey, we're not logged in, show an authenticated symbol, and we should see the user ID in there as well. As this reloads, my cookie is still set from when I was testing it. Let's clear the cookies. Now we're unauthenticated. So how are we going to set up this cookie in our browser that's going to stay persistent across different times you're on the website and get that nice permissions for whatever you need to do with it? Whether we need to say certain users can see this, certain users can't. How are we going to do that? We're going to use a package called Hono. Hono is like your Express server, except we're going to be able to run it using Vercel for free without any setup. So it's pretty convenient. We're going to go over to the API file. We're going to go over to the API folder where I will show you, that's not where I wanted to put it. I'll show you what they have in their documentation on ZeroSync's repository or website. Not sure, but I copied this code. We had the index, copy, let's talk through it. So we're getting the Hono server instance. We're allowing it to set our cookies using the cookie package, and then we're handling all of this using Vercel, as I said before. Then we're also going to get that sign function from that other package that's also responsible for decoding it. From here, we're going to set up the Hono. Runtime edge, that's for Vercel. Then we're going to declare a get method, login. Here is where we would have an instance from the database. So we'd have a database, a table of users. We'd want to fetch that in here. We wouldn't want to hard code it like this. For now, I've hard coded it for an example. You wouldn't do this in production. But we're going to create our token payload using that single user ID. You would actually use whatever the person had put in. So if I put in Elijah Simmons, it's going to say, oh, hey, this guy's trying to sign in as Elijah Simmons. Is his password right? This is where you would have password authentication as well. Otherwise, we're going to pretend like everything's all right. This guy really is Elijah Simmons. We're going to sign that payload. There's a couple different things we're going to set in here. They're pretty self-explanatory. This is the algorithm we're going to use to encode it. This is the time we're going to say it's allowed to exist. So as we saw earlier, mine was persisting from when I was testing earlier. This would persist for 30 days, given what we set it. You could do this for as long as you want. We'll sign it, encode it, make sure we have our auth secret, otherwise it's going to fail. Set the cookie, and then return the context with an OK symbol. A lot of stuff going on here. It truly isn't as complicated as it seems, though. Now that we have this API endpoint, let's call it from our sign in. So if we go back to our server, let's check if we're logged in. We're not. Still unauthenticated. In fact, my stuff disappeared. Yes, so had to pop my stash. We're unauthenticated, we're anonymous. We're still anonymous. No matter what we do, we're not getting signed in. That's because we haven't hooked up that endpoint. Let's create a function to call that endpoint and say, hey, I'm Elijah Simmons, would you please sign me in? Sign in. User. Fetch. And let's really make sure. We will then add a button, or just actually add our onClick function to say, hey, when you click sign in the user. Of course, you would pass in the parameters the user gave you. In this instance, it would be a username and a password. For now, I'm just going to show you how it would work without passing those in. And the logic to implement that will be super simple. And of course, we'll see that later in the series as well. Of course, we need to actually call this function. It's my error. Still learning the basics. But now if we run our server, and probably have to restart this. Now if we try it, we can see we're logged in. And that random string of numbers and letters is simply the way the token is decoded. If you wanted that to actually display the username or password, you could simply return what you passed in or get the data from the database where you're storing it. Of course, we'll get to that in a future video. I appreciate you watching. Let me know if you have any questions or tips on how to architect this app as we get into more of the nitty-gritty. Of course, stay tuned as we dive into more ZeroSync tutorials. The next one will be about how to have reactive queries. What are the limits? How can we do this fast and effectively and not make things more complicated than they have to be? Thank you for watching. I'll see you.